Warm greetings on behalf of the Asian Transport Outlook team. I will be discussing a couple of stories on freight transport in the Asia Pacific region. We'll dive into them both from a data and policy perspective. To start with, I'm going to very briefly introduce to you the Asian Transport Outlook Initiative. The ATO is funded by the ADB and now also by AIIB. It covers 51 economies and 460 urban centers, 46 of which have detailed data. What makes ATO unique as a transport database is that it records data from primary sources, example, government reports, statistical handbooks, as well as secondary sources like the MDB reports, UN agency reports, individual research works, and many more. ATO records data from multiple sources for a single indicator. It has records of transport indicators for multiple dimensions, modes, and scales. And most importantly, ATO records both data as well as policy information for these 51 economies. The box below details out some of the key statistics of the ATO products. What you can see is that there is wealth of latest information available in the ATO, and about 90% of the work as of today can be accessed at asiantransportoutlook.com. Since 2000, the population in Asia and Pacific region has increased by 20%, inland transport infrastructure by 80%, domestic material consumption by 120%, trade, that is import and export, and GDP by 270%. Subsequently, the domestic freight activity increased by 150%. Historically, freight demand has increased at a higher pace than passenger transport in Asia, and projections reveal that it would continue to do so in the future. What we realize is that the freight activity is growing slower than GDP, but at a faster rate compared to the population, road and rail infrastructure. And the projections by the ITF suggest that with current policies, domestic freight demand could grow at an annual growth rate of about 3.7% between 2020 and 2050, amounting to about 65 trillion ton kilometers by 2050. This growth demands a rapid infrastructure development as well. But what is the status of transport infrastructure in Asia as of today? Asia has about 58% of the global population, 47% of the GDP, with only 31% of global transport infrastructure. That is, it has limited availability of infrastructure. Further, infrastructure is disproportionately distributed across Asia. For example, about 70% of economies with road availability below the Asia Pacific average are low and lower middle income economies. Consequently, efficient access to supply chains in rural areas remains a significant challenge. Approximately 22% of the rural population globally lacks year-round access to road networks. In the Asia Pacific region alone, 18% of the rural population, equating to 408 million individuals, reside more than 2 kilometers away from all-weather roads. Such limited accessibility isolates rural farmers and producers from more profitable markets that cater to national, regional, and global supply chains. Talking about shipping connectivity now, the analysis reveals that only a select few Asian countries enjoy improved access and connectivity, leading to reduced transportation costs associated with trade. Notably, since 2004, countries like Vietnam, Palau, Russia, Solomon Islands, and Myanmar have shown remarkable strides in enhancing their connectivity. Although about half of the Asian economies have a very low connectivity score ranging between 0 and 20. Talking about the modal shifts, at a national scale, the modal share varies significantly among countries, shaped by geography, economics, policies, and infrastructure. However, a common trend is the shift towards road transport from more sustainable options like rail and shipping. There could be a number of push factors, like the road infrastructure has expanded twice as fast as railways since 2000. globalization is another push factor. And most important one being the demand for reliable, cost-effective and door-to-door freight services which attracts road as a popular choice. Now let's take a look at what's happening at the urban level. In 2022, urban freight transport in Asian nations constituted 15% of domestic freight activity. The modal share is still dominated by trucks, while non-motorized modes contribute only 0.3%. Projections by ITF suggest that with current policies, the freight transport demand increase would outpace that of passenger. The growing e-commerce is a significant contributor to this. Next, we discuss freight transport externalities. Transport CO2 emissions mode shares vary significantly among countries, but almost consistently, the heavy-duty trucks contribute largest share, followed by light-duty vehicles. Current business as usual projections in Asian countries reveal that from 2020 to 2030, freight CO2 emissions would increase by 26% to 36%. Without a significant mode shift policy, about 70% of the surface transport freight would continue to be transported by emission-intensive trucks. IPCC reveals that natural disasters have become more frequent and severe over the last 7 decades, potentially impacting logistics operations. This, in turn, heightens risks and operational costs for governments and the private sector. Asia has about 35% of the transport infrastructure, but accounts for about 60% of the estimated global expected annual damages, or EAD. This indicates that the Asian transport infrastructure is disproportionately vulnerable to the effects of climate change. And further, infrastructure resilience in lower income Asian countries is significantly lower than their prosperous counterparts. Coming to the air pollution challenge. Diesel vehicles are a significant source of air pollution in the Asia Pacific region, causing most road disease burden from PM 2.5 and ground level ozone. Diesel exhaust fumes are especially harmful to people in the bus, trucking, heavy vehicle repair, mining, and railroad industries. The number of deaths from occupational exposure to diesel engine exhaust continues to rise in most of the Asia. While some regulations have been expanded recently, their impact is poorly understood. With respect to road crash fatalities, Asia and Pacific region accounts for 60% of global road traffic crash fatalities, despite possessing only around 30% of the world's road infrastructure. Annually, an estimated 800,000 lives are lost due to road crashes in Asia, resulting in an economic toll of nearly 2.2 trillion USD in 2019. These road traffic crash fatalities represent approximately 2.2% of total deaths. Freight vehicles play a significant role in road traffic crashes in Asia. Although the fleet of freight vehicles in the region is relatively small, comprising about 5 to 10% of the total, they are involved in a relatively high percentage of road crashes. While the precise regional contribution of the freight vehicles to road traffic crash fatalities remains uncertain, some national estimates suggest a range between 10% and 30%. There are several potential causes of these statistics, including truck overloading, inadequate maintenance, aging vehicles, drivers' unsafe behavior, poor road infrastructure quality, just to name a few. Now we'll look at the policy analysis for a sample of 15 countries, carried out using the policy trackers developed by the ATO. We have collected 1,100 plus policy documents. These policy documents range from transport policies, energy master plans, road master plans, rail policies, climate change policies, and many others. The following analysis is a synthesis of this. Take a look at this distribution chart. It shows that only 2% of the transport relevant documents are freight specific in nature, while 7% of the total measures and 3% of the targets are exclusively focusing on freight. Overall, we see that there is comparatively less focus on freight subsector compared to the passenger. Out of the 15 economies, we record the freight policies for 6 economies listed in the table. Based on the analysis, we find only a few measures that suggest reducing freight activity. For example, Bangladesh will phase out fossil fuel subsidies and redirect funds to the development of renewable energy and climate adaptation. Vietnam targets implementation and full compliance of electronic toll collection by 2030. Nepal will increase fuel prices to limit the use of vehicles. So it would mean that the policy landscape is not transformationally limiting or reducing the freight activity. On the other hand, we also note only a few targets for improving access and connectivity from a freight perspective in national policy documents. What this would mean is that the transport infrastructure in the form of roads, rail, seaports, airport infrastructure would be overloaded or working beyond capacities under a BAU scenario. The few examples of access improvement include, for example, Bangladesh targets to upgrade all village roads to asphalt standard by 2041. Indonesia aims to build 21 new airports and 36 new ports by 2024. There are also urban level measures adopted by the countries. For example, Pakistan will implement night operations for cargo movement and develop dedicated freight corridors to limit urban pass-through. Malaysia will operationalize a comprehensive city logistics model by developing freight consolidation centers. Even fewer Asian economies have set a freight mode shift target, suggesting an ongoing trend towards unsustainable freight transport unless policies change. Only 8 targets are recorded for a sample of 15 economies. On the other hand, we find significant growth in freight transport related statements of ambition, targets, and policy measure recommendations to improve performance. Most of the measures are either infrastructure or service oriented. For example, Bhutan will build dry ports and supporting facilities and railway links. Thailand will implement intelligent logistics management and e-commerce systems. With respect to freight transport related externalities, we find exponential growth in the number of related statements across economies in Asia, primarily related to the core benefits, that is tackling climate change, air pollution, and road safety. Policies and initiatives within the transport sector typically encompass a spectrum of objectives. For instance, the truck overloading related restriction measures tend to not only improve road safety but also increase fuel economy and reduce air pollutant emissions. The climate mitigation and adaptation policy measures on freight transport are multidimensional. They range from freight assets oriented regulations, operational, economic instruments, technology, and capacity building. Similarly, for road safety, it includes a wide range of measures, including the co-benefiting measures. In summary, the freight transport subsector in Asia shows a mixed picture. On one hand, the transport infrastructure does not seem likely to be growing at pace with the increasing demand under a BAU scenario. As a result, the national and subnational access and connectivity would be compromised. The freight modal shift might be moving away from more sustainable modes. On the other hand, we see that the policy landscape with respect to the freight subsector is slowly maturing. The improvement is also reaped out of the co-benefits, and there are far more diverse measures being adopted by the countries. Consequently, if the gap between the planning and implementation is shortened and investments are made in the right direction, the freight transport subsector can significantly improve. In conclusion, it is important to highlight that in spite of the rapid increase in freight activity, the policies are maturing at a much slower pace compared to the passenger transport. There is a greater diversity in the freight performance and infrastructure among Asian countries, and this is both at urban as well as national levels. And despite the importance and complexity of the freight transport subsector, there is a lack of systemic knowledge. With some hope, we aim to deliver a more updated presentation next year with more granular data and more diverse policies as the subsectoral importance grows and the Asian economies advance with more focused data and policies for freight transport. Thank you.